on to Mayor and Council comments. John, your end?
No, sir.
Lynn?
No, thank you.
Okay. Doug?
No.
Yeah. No, thanks. No, thank you. Okay, that was easy. Public comment. We've got one card so far, Sharon, right? As we all know the rules of public comment, 3 minutes and one-way conversation, and we have one card. Danny Ross, name and address, 3 minutes, Mr. Ross.
Thank you, and Happy New Year. Jim, welcome to the council.
Thank you, sir.
I'm proud to see you sitting up there. I think you'll serve with integrity and represent your district very, very nicely. I stand before you tonight from 1859 to Neal Court in Dunwoody, where I have resided for the last 38 years. And I stand before you as being part of your body for some 3.5 years in the inaugural term. During that time, I had a chance to do several things which I'm very proud of. One of them, the prayer that Doug just recited, is a prayer that I wrote and insisted being put into the agenda. That prayer is very meaningful, and it really draws your attention to what we're all about here. It talks about the mission and the values of this city. And it prays that you will, in fact, keep faithful to those missions and values. On your dais tonight, I placed a copy of the mission, vision, and values document, which I thought would be useful for you to reorient yourself with, and also for Jim as a new member to maybe acquaint yourself with for the first time. This is something that I also wrote on behalf of the council as a member of the task force before the city was actually formed. And that, together with the ethics code, were the first two things that were actually passed by the city of Dunwoody when we became a city on December the 1st. In that mission statement, there's paragraph 1 of the vision statement. It talks about the important things that we have as our values. And you, as a council person, are committed to those values. And those values are to be trustworthy, to act with utmost integrity and courage, be truthful, and this also applies to the citizens, not only the council people, but the people who work for the city. And we need to make sure that when people stand before you and make proposals to you and represent projects that are going on to you, that people are honest in those decisions. I'm going to prolong my discussions about the subject matter on the agenda tonight at this time, but I may come back up at the end of this when the public comments are there. But I will take this opportunity to put into the public records the letter which I sent to each one of you last Friday regarding the state of our 911 CAD2CAD. It's incredible where we are on this thing at this point, and I have more to talk about that a little bit later when I stand before you in the public comments later on in this thing. But I want to turn into, for the records, a copy of that letter and also a copy of the...
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence.
All right, thanks. That's all we have for public comment. Let's move on to city business. We have G1 with Kimberly Greer speaking about the CAD2CAD interface project.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Since the December update, the CAD2CAD interface project has taken one step forward and then ran into an unexpected roadblock. We completed several rounds of testing in December, each built upon the success of the last. In our final test for the month, I believe we tested the interface to the satisfaction of both 911 centers, in that all test calls transferred successfully and updates were appropriately sent between the two 911 centers. However, as we prepared for Go Live, Interact, DeKalb County's CAD system vendor, advised they would need to complete a CAD software system update in order for the interface to work in a truly live environment. The update relates to how call information will be sent from the 911 center out to the mobile units, where the ambulances and fire trucks responding to these calls. From your reaction to the distribution of my memorandum, I believe I understand how angry, frustrated, and downright disappointed the council feels that this project faces yet another delay. I share these sentiments, and I have expressed our displeasure to both Interact and to their parent company, AT&T. The necessary CAD system update is now scheduled for the first week of February. Between now and then, DeKalb and Interact will be working with the update in a test environment to ensure that there are no unintended consequences for their 911 center as a whole and for our interface project. At the council's request, I reached out to Lieutenant Mooney to see if he would be available for this evening's meeting. He had a prior commitment, but has agreed to come to our meeting in 2 weeks to give the council an update on how things are going and how we're progressing towards that scheduled update of the CAD system. I am coordinating another round of interface testing for the second week in February to follow that CAD system update. Last week, the mayor, Chief Grogan, and I visited the Chatcomm Technical Advisory Committee and then the Chatcomm Authority Board. Both agreed to hold special call meetings so that they would not further delay implementation with their approval. The new target for go-live is the end of February. I believe this CAD software system updates highlights a fact that several councilors have made in previous meetings and the discussion that we've had. Our CAD2CAD interface will be impacted and potentially disrupted each time that either 911 center needs to make a system change. As such, I think it may be appropriate to respectfully recommend that you consider discussing alternative long-term, more stable solutions to improve fire and emergency medical dispatching and processing at your upcoming strategic planning. I stand ready for your question.
So, once again, we're placed with a challenge where we are just in the middle of nowhere with this stuff because we don't have, I mean, it's nice that DeKalb is even worried about accommodating us with Interactive because we're leaving them. And and sometimes software updates go very poorly. I would say that sometimes more often than not, they go very poorly in the initial stages. And I remain concerned that what we have gotten ourselves into is a situation that isn't sustainable, that we are going to remain someone's pawn every time they do an upgrade, every time they need to do an upgrade. And once we back away from the CAD answering our calls, if someone has to upgrade something and it doesn't work and it takes the system offline, what is our plan in that case? Because I assume that down the road, DeKalb will need to upgrade its CAD again. And so if you could share with us what the plan is for that case scenario.
If I understood the question correctly, is that in the scenario where the CAD2CAD is operational,
Right.
but that either center would need to make an upgrade, which would make it so that you couldn't use the interface during that time period, the backup plan would be the one-button transfer, which is they figure out it's a fire or medical call and then transfer it via phone to the DeKalb County dispatcher.
So even though will we still be paying money to DeKalb County?
We don't pay money to DeKalb County now.
But as a taxpayer, I do because I pay a 911 fee. But my 911 fee is now going no.
Yeah, your 911 fee goes to Chatcomm.
Right. But so hear what I'm saying.
Okay.
So the next time, once this goes operational, and something happens on the DeKalb County side, what obligation do they have? Because I'm no longer a paying customer of DeKalb County 911.
And to kind of from a historical standpoint, we separated from the DeKalb 911 Center about 2 years ago. So the fees for the last 2 years have been going to the Chatcomm 911 Center. So that intergovernmental agreement we have with the county has been terminated for 911 services for quite some time. So it really is not going to impact. In other words, how we are right now is that the Chatcomm receives the call and then sends the call over to the DeKalb County call taker. That's what we've been doing for the last 2 years,
right.
And that'll be the backup plan.
So I'm going to tell you, having seen this before in DeKalb County school system, where the charter schools were supposed to pay for their school buses, and forever they were never billed. And then all of a sudden we get a CFO at DeKalb who notices things in the school system, and he notices that they're providing services to charter schools that are supposed to be paying for it. And now they want lots of money in arrears. And I'm just concerned. I realize in a life safety matter, they're not going to cut us off. They're going to do what they're supposed to do. But what is their obligation to do what they're supposed to do?
We've had this discussion with the county, specifically on the exact same issue, and that they want to take a look at whether or not the city should be paying fees for the dispatching and call taking and dispatching of fire calls. And the city's position has been and will continue to be that we pay the fire service tax, and that there has to be a route to be able to get the call to the fire department, which we're already paying for, and that they take those calls as a secondary PSAP. That's been our legal position. That's been discussed with them, and each time we've had that discussion with them, they've accepted our position, and there's no charge additionally beyond what we're paying the fire service tax at this point.
For me, every layer of this project makes me more and more uncomfortable. And it's almost, I won't describe it as a comedy of errors because I see nothing particularly entertaining about it. We should have hired a consultant. We should have had someone who understood the dynamics of CAD, and we've gotten ourselves into it. So next 6 months from now, Chatcomm's software people may change something. And we're a customer, not a board member. And so we need to start examining what we're going to do next, because this isn't working.
I think that's a point where there's common agreement on, and that
and I think we're all there.
Right.
This is an upgrade of service over what we have now. Let me kind of back up, Mr. Mayor, and just kind of lay it out from a strategic standpoint. The move from DeKalb 911 to Chatcomm, one of the issues present there was that you'd be moving from a consolidated dispatch center that had all your public safety under one envelope to separate them out. And the policy choice that the council made at the time was sort of twofold. One is that 90% of our calls are police calls, and that those were highly problematic for a number of reasons. And the Chatcomm solution had a 50% reduction in 90% of the calls coming through. So 3,000 out of 3,300 are now answered 50% faster. So that was sort of the big benefit to moving to Chatcomm for that particular service. Knowing that the fire calls would have an inherent delay. One of the arguments and sort of recommendations the staff made is that if you were able to put together and implement the CAD2CAD interface, that would then solve that problem and make it seamless. At the time, I would agree with you going from a backwards analysis. Yeah, the time frames that we felt like would be realistic have been, to say blown would be an understatement. And it may be prudent at some point to go back and review everything as to what other decisions could have been made once the train left the station and move forward with it. And I wouldn't argue with that some mistakes were made, but what we're trying to figure out from here, at least from my standpoint, is where we go from here forward. And I think the key is that what we're finding, even if we're able to, when we're able to put together the CAD2CAD interface and go live with it, it really is an interim or bridge solution to a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is that the most seamless way to dispatch public safety is when all of the services are under one umbrella, including the dispatch. The dispatch is able to dispatch all of your public safety entities, EMS, fire, and police. So I think that should be the long-term goal of the city. And we've explored, and we're going to continue to explore other options besides the service delivery strategy that we have now. And I think the council's position is that going back and saying, okay, you know what, we should just, re-sign our agreement with DeKalb County, let them dispatch police and fire, we'd be slowing up 90% of our calls by 50%. That's not a real good policy option. So from here forward, we can look at things such as partnering with Sandy Springs on fire services, North Metro Fire Department, or Dunwoody Fire Department. All of those would then consolidate the dispatching of fire and EMS into the broader envelope. And I think that's strategically where the council has been discussing over the past year is how do we sort of make some changes in the fire services to bring that consolidation together and to improve fire services generally in the city. Those have not come to a final agreement at this point as to what direction to go in, but it's under serious consideration. And one of the issues at your retreat is to continue to talk about that and get some additional direction from the council as to which avenues to pursue and what additional studies we need to make to be able to make an informed decision on that. So sorry to be so long-winded, but I just kind of wanted to give you all the background is that we all agree that this is not the be-all, end-all solution. We thought there'd be a longer bridge that would be on to make good use of the CAD2CAD. There still is. I believe we'll bring to you at the next several months a proposal from Chatcomm to extend the contract that we have with them at similar terms we have now, and that would obviously extend that bridge if CAD2CAD were working with the caveat that each time anybody upgrades their system, there will be a time off period where we'll be back at the one-button transfer.
And I'd like to see in the agreement you bring forward that we're going to find a way to do the upgrades where we only have the backup if need, as opposed to assuring that we're going to use the backup.
Yes, ma'am. And we have had meetings with the DeKalb County's Nuance Center folks, our IT folks, and the Chatcomm folks to ensure that we plan for these technical updates and that we can ensure that any downtime is minimized. Ideally, the updates would take in mind all the different software systems that feed out of the online, such as that. So, yes, we're aware there will need to be updates in the future and our policies in place and the legal system.
And Mike, do you think they buy into all that?
From my conversations, I'm happy with the fact that DeKalb County is acknowledging that they will get this this update done. I'm not sure why they didn't have the update done up until now, but they have promised to make sure it happens, and they're very top people are promising. So,
But what about the stakeholders at Chatcomm when timely notification of upgrades and stuff like that? Do you think their software partners are better convinced that it's okay for them to serve us?
I think that they prefer to have us than not have us. That's the answer.
The other factor too, which is an advantage on the Chatcomm side, is that we use the same records management system which is the same CAD provider, which is OSSI Suncor. So there's some more synergy with the other cities and using the same CAD vendor and the records management as we do with the other cities. So it's a little more seamless on the Chatcomm side.
Just a quick comment, question. Every time this comes up, we hear this. Oh, it's only 10%, 10 calls a day. But I'd like to point out that there's a pretty fundamental difference between a 911 call because somebody's car got broken into over in the parking lot at Perimeter Mall, and a call for EMS. And these 10% of calls have I believe, a significantly greater life safety component to them. And for that reason, you can't just say, well, it's just 10%. They're not apples to apples.
Yeah, I apologize if in my comments it appeared to be minimizing the value of the calls. It's 10% of the total volume of the calls, but certainly, every call that we run, especially on the fire and EMS side, could be a life safety issue, and I acknowledge the importance of those calls, especially.
I know we've been working at Chatcomm DeKalb for 2 years now. And I think we ought to continue to go through the process. But the decision's right here with us settling is how we're going to react to it. Kimberly, we've been doing it for a couple of years. But ultimately, we got to make a decision. Are we going to start our own 911? Are we going to, get our own fire department? Where are we going to go long term? Now, again, short term, I think we got to continue through the process. We're there. We always keep hearing, 2 more months. But I'm looking forward to that discussion at the retreat because I think we need to talk about that. Our contract's coming up soon. And Lynn, to your point, I don't like, when you're a client and you're not being treated well, you go elsewhere. And how much longer are we going to take it? That's the downside with public-private partnerships. When your private component is not treating you fairly, you've got to make the decision. But again, we can bark at them. The decision is us. We control this process, and it's not an easy one. Fire departments aren't cheap, and 911 call centers aren't cheap. we're the only ones that can solve it. I'm just not getting a comfort level that this process, they're treating us with all respect. Now, with that, you know, we're still using the industry standard one button call, and you know, from a you know, service delivery standpoint, we're still as good as everybody else in DeKalb. But I know Dunwoody, we don't want as good as everybody else. We want better. So it's a tough process to get as good as everybody else to better. But I think we need to hash it out to retreat.
Yeah, I'm not an IT expert, as everybody knows in this room, but when I update my computer, it takes me about 2 minutes maybe or so, and I'm up and running. I don't think I understand, Nash, back there in the back, he's kind of looking there. I don't understand why when we go, if they have an update in their CAD2CAD system, why that system doesn't have an internal check system on it that immediately tells us it's good to go. I'm not as savvy on that, but it just seems odd to me that you would have to go back and reinvent the wheel when you already had the system done and all you did was update the system. I don't reinvent the wheel on a computer at home, but can you shed any light on this? Is that something that really is, absolutely necessary, or can they just put the system in and then just kick it right up and say, okay, let me see, I've got the green lights, it's up and running?
It's a good question. So I asked that question to Interact and to AT&T, and they assured me that as soon as the update was complete, we could begin using the interface itself. However, for both 911 centers, with Chatcomm and CAD, to feel comfortable with utilizing this technology, they need a comfort level with it as well. So they would like to make sure that we do another round of interface testing to check and recheck all the aspects of the interface, because they're the ones that are responsible for processing and then dispatching these calls. So although the vendors that have created the software update assure us that it will be ready for use immediately, it is for the comfort level of the 911 centers and how to use it that I think it's appropriate to complete that additional round of interface testing following the system update.
Just to follow, how long, is it, we've got the system up and working, they've upgraded it, do we have 4 or 5 calls in, we say we work, let's go? Or is this just a, 8 to 4:30 and I'll be back tomorrow and try it again? I mean, is there a 24/7 expediency here, or no?
The way our testing calls have worked in the past, and I anticipate this one will work as well based on the dates we're running around between through, is that it will likely be a 2 to 2.5 hour testing session, in which we go through as many calls as we can fit into a 2.5 hour testing session. With those testing calls, we test as wide a variety of fire emergency medical calls as possible, and we make sure that with each call we send back and forth updates, which is kind of the critical function of the interface itself. As long as both centers continue to see that the calls are transferred successfully as well as the updates, I fully anticipate that as soon as we're done with that call, we'll be able to move towards go live.
So we're not talking 2 to 3 weeks or 2 weeks or a week, we're talking more like hours?
Well, sir, as we've discussed in the past, following this final successful testing round, both the Chatcomm Technical Advisory Committee as well as the Chatcomm Authority Board need to meet to officially sign off on the use of this interface in their system. The CAD process is much quicker in this instance, in that Lieutenant Mooneyham, who's the director of the 911 Center, has been integral and involved in all the testing sessions, so I do not anticipate needing to formally go to no live. However, as I mentioned in the update, with the TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee, and the Authority Board have agreed to hold special call meetings as soon as we wrap up that testing session successfully. So hours, days, maybe weeks, probably more likely, because once we say go live, I'm sure both 911 centers will need to make sure that every single shift, and they have multiple shifts that run out of their centers, is aware, knows that we're changing this process to the end. That's it. So, yes, my target is the end of February. I hope to come back to the council in March. We're very happy to update, but it's a process.
You're just a messenger. I do fully understand. I just did everything everybody else did up here too. Kim made a good point, you know, it's yeah, it's 10%, you know, if you miss one of them, you know, and that's you, then it becomes a big 10%.
Right, which is why Chief Bergen and his team have been also responding and being aware of all the fire and emergency medical calls on which they can assist. So we've had a number of instances where our police department has worked to be aid and as almost a force multiplier for our fire department to ensure that as many as we can sort of fall through the cracks in any way.
I have 2 points, Kimberly, and I think you just made one of them. Number one, I echo the frustration of council, and I've let staff know my thoughts on it. I'm looking forward to the discussion at the work session. Point number one was that if we were to get our own 911 center, we would still have to transfer calls or do some sort of transfer to the fire department. That's not ours. It only solves one section of the problem. It's not the solution. It's not the be-all, end-all. We will still not control the fire at that point. Second point was what Kimberly just alluded to. All EMS calls are police calls, and they go to there as fast as possible. I would imagine it's a priority call, Billy. You can confirm or not. I would imagine they are.
It depends on what the call is.
All right.
Somebody hurt their arm.
But a heart attack is probably a heart attack or emergency medical is a high priority call. And we've saved some people because of it. And sometimes even with the CAD2CAD working, we would still probably, having an officer right around the corner, beat the EMS there. So I just want to make sure that that point is taken, that we are serving our citizens and getting to every emergency as quick as possible. And the system that we have in place now makes some of those things happen in an efficient manner. Thank you.
I do concur with my colleagues about the need to discuss this at the retreat. Alternative options for a permanent long-term solution to dispatching fire and EMS. If we turn back the hands of time 2 years, over 2 years, I know I had an expectation that this CAD2CAD was going to be a permanent solution to having disparate dispatch centers. And it's become clear throughout all these updates, there are too many parties involved in this. We got, the CAD vendor for DeKalb, we got the CAD vendor for Chatcomm, we got IXP, we got the Chatcomm Authority, we got the turnover in DeKalb, and there's just so many parties involved in this, not the least of which is our own, that whenever one of the fingers doesn't do what they need to do, the system doesn't work. And so it bothers me that even if the CAD2CAD was already live, went live tomorrow or was already live, it's clear to me it's not a long-term solution because there's so many fingers involved in this. It could fall apart at a minute's notice. Chatcomm could, or IXP, still not clear to me which organization would do it, could change the coding system they use. And it then would not be compatible with DeKalb. DeKalb could change something on their end. And we're just being whipped around by all those fingers in the pie. So what we need is something that's a long-term change, a long-term solution, as opposed to one that feels like it's an interim bridge to that. And the more that I look at this CAD2CAD over these last 2 years, it's clear this is more of an interim solution. I don't see it as a long-term solution. Certainly it's better when it works, it's better than one-button transfer, but there's so many moving parts to this and so many different vendors. I don't see how it's possible to be considered a long-term solution. And so, Warren, you said earlier it's not the long-term solution, and I think that's been very important.
And one comment that I really learned from digging into this a little bit deeper was the fact that DeKalb County accepts 1 million 911 calls a year. And what we were asking them to do is allow our people to enter information into their system. And as you can imagine, that made them nervous. So we've gone through what we all consider to be a much longer period of time than we thought, and now we find out that once we think we're already there, and then we find out, oh, we forgot to do the update, and we can't make it work until we do the update, so that pushes it back another couple months. But the point is, I understand their fear and trepidation of opening up their computer system to a non-DeKalb County entity. And so I think that's what we have to keep in mind is they're being very careful because if we break it, we bought it.
Right.
Yeah, we've got a real problem if we break it, and I think that's their fear. So I think this really is going to be a major discussion for our retreat, and I think we've got long-term and short-term issues to deal with. Like to Doug's point, I think it still comes to the fact that one button isn't perfect, and it's not Dunwoody, but it is being accepted across the county, and Doraville and Chamblee have been doing it that way for years. And it's not perfect, but it works, and it works better than where we were before, I think. So, yeah, with that said, any more comments on this one? Thank you. All right. I don't think we have any other concerns.
There is an item missing on this work session agenda, and that is to review the 7 o'clock meeting agenda.
That's what I was just looking for. I didn't see it. Thank you, Terry, because that's what I was looking for. I'm thinking, where is that? As far as the 7 o'clock agenda, is there anything anybody wants to move, add, delete? Anything? Going? Good. We can bring that back up at 7, but right now we're leaving 7 o'clock agenda as is. And thank you again, Terry. No text amendments, no other business. Let's move on to public comment now. Again, the rules are always 3 minutes, one-way conversation, name and address, and we start with Jerry Penn.
Good evening. I am Jerry Penn, and I live in Dunwoody North. First, I want to wish all of you a happy and a healthy new year. As you all know, on Saturday, January 11th, bad storms went through the Atlanta area. There were tornado watches for Cherokee County, where our children and grandsons live. I knew that our kids would be warned, as there are sirens in Woodstock, and one at a fire station not far from our kids. When they heard the siren, they went to their crawl space. The city of Dunwoody has spent money and continues to spend money for bike lanes to make it safer for bicyclists that serve a minority of our citizens. Sirens would protect all of our citizens and visitors, and probably would cost less to install than to protect an entire city. Than putting bike lanes in the entire city that serves the few. I'm not against having bike lanes, but I feel installing sirens is more important, and I hope you will consider that. I noticed that you're going to be initiating text amendments for chapters 16, 20, and 27. I wanted to mention to you that our new zoning rewrite neglected to address open storage in front, side, and rear yards. The point of this code, which existed in DeKalb County, is to protect the integrity of our neighborhoods and avoid having yards look like a junkyard. Since you are discussing the zoning ordinances tonight, I hope you will look into this omission. Thank you for serving our community, and as always, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Ms. Penn. Next one up is Tony Delmici. I don't see him here. All right, time's up. Last one up is Danny Ross. Name, address, in 3 minutes, Mr. Ross.
Danny Ross, 1859 Neal Court. I sit here listening to you deliberate about the 911, and I hear information that, quite frankly, doesn't make a lot of sense. Warren always alludes to the fact that we have a one-button transfer to fall back on. Just like Chamblee, just like Doraville, just like Decatur, all these have one 911, have one-button transfer, and that's what the industry standard is. Doraville, Chamblee, and Decatur serve one municipality. Chatcomm serves 3. They have to make sure that a call comes in for an EMS or fire is for Dunwoody, not Johns Creek, not Sandy Springs, and people that live in Sandy Springs still think they live in Dunwoody. So it's a very difficult thing. I talked to the 911 director at Chambly. It takes less than 15 seconds for him to transfer a call over. The last report that we got from Kimberly said it took 1 minute and 20 seconds to make that transfer. We can collect all the data we need, and we can in fact dispatch with the data that we collect here on this end and eliminate 2 minutes and 30 seconds of time that's currently in the process that Warren has suggested that we should keep. Over the past 2 years, we've been misled by the city manager sitting to my right here many, many times. He has allowed the management of this project to go with a person that is a very nice person, somebody I respect highly, but it's somebody that just isn't equipped to manage a project that involves 7 different parties. A technical project like this. He's let this go on and on and on. You, Mr. Knoll, said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. This man has done it over and over again, and you've sat in the dice and you let that happen. I'm calling on his termination tonight because he's put 10,210 people at risk over the past 1,021 days because of his operational skills, his management skills, and I can tell you they are at risk. What you're doing here is unconscionable. This is the worst managed project that I've ever seen. And I've been involved with many, many companies as board members and starting innovations of this thing. And you sit up there and you talk about, just the fringes of this problem. This is a problem that affects the safety of our people, and that's the #1 reason we became a city, is for public safety. And you should act on this. But this man needs to be fired.
All right, Mayor and Council closing comments. Doug, you're in?
None.
Not at the moment.
John?
No, sir.
All right. We are going to move into executive session for personnel.